I'm going to leave this slide up for a minute because this is the best part of the presentation. Spent a lot of time making it, so I'll let you enjoy it for a second because I thought it looks cool. Oh, and I forgot I'm being video recorded, so I'll stop pacing awkwardly up front. Okay, cool. Hey, welcome. A little bit about me. My name is Lucas Hall. I'm originally from Dayton, Ohio. I was in K-12 there, and then I somewhat recently relocated to Bellingham, Washington, about an hour and a half north of Seattle, to a small private financial firm. If you ask me if I'm from Seattle, if you're from anywhere else but Washington, I'll say yes, but really no. I'm closer to Vancouver than I am to Seattle. Yeah, I am at the Lucanator on Twitter, Lucas J. Hall in Slack, and I vlog very seldom. A little bit about some context of where I'm coming from. I believe context is really key when you start talking about different tools and implementations. We have clients. All of our physical clients are Mac OS. We do run some virtual Windows clients and terminal servers. We have Windows servers. We have Debian-based servers. I guess you can say we have Mac servers if you can have a Mac server. We're a really small team that supports geographically diverse operations. We have an office in Washington, we have an office in Nevada, and we have an office in Malaysia. So there's 3 tech people total, and I am the primary. If CP is a thing, I'm that for Macs on our team. I tend to prefer free and open source tools, which seems really contradictory to being in the finance industry, where we're highly regulated. We're required to note all the changes and monitor all the things, and monitor all the things that note all the changes that monitor the things. So some goals out of this talk is I feel like osquery is to 2018 as Docker was to 2016 or something. I feel like this is the Docker of this year or something. It's getting a lot of love, and it's had a lot of talks. This talk kind of came out of just kind of me going through learning about it and finding a way to kind of get it to a place that I felt was useful in an infrastructure. If you want to call it a stack, I guess it's a stack. But I kind of tried to take this lofty idea of being wowed by like Zach in the osquery session into something that's like usable and like would actually return things to me that I care about. Yeah. So I'm just going to be probably short. Yeah, if you have any questions, hold them till the end. I get distracted really easily during talks, so I may never get back on. So I'm going to do a quick overview of kind of where this came from, and then I'll talk about some examples from each of those in the overview of the stack, and then we'll definitely have time for Q&A at the end. So this talk, again, please keep in mind, like small single team. I come from like like I do it all kind of thing. I manage and patch my Linux servers to manage my user machines to all of the above. So I'm going to keep it high level. Like for real, I can look around the room and I see several people that this is probably pretty low level or high level for you guys, and you might get bored. So just don't heckle me. If you heckle me in the Slack channel. So the example stack I'm going to talk about is using osquery as a tool to monitor an endpoint via Collide's open source project called Fleet, with the integration of a server, Graylog, for Syslog serving. So essentially an elk stack. So I feel really weird talking about osquery more. Already this week, if you were here for the workshops, in the minimum viable security workshop, there was already a very similar kind of infrastructure that was somewhat touched on that I'm going to talk about. Again, Zach from Collide did an awesome presentation earlier this week on exploring osquery and how to use it in the terminal and what it can do. It was really great, and I encourage you guys, like, if you saw that, who here went to this session specifically? Okay, so about the first third of this talk is way lower than stuff you guys have already heard, so just bear with me on that. So yeah, osquery, performant endpoint usability. In Zach's session, somebody asked, is that actually a word? And I thought about that too. I actually looked it up. I don't think it's really a word. I think they did actually make it up at Facebook. So I don't want to hit on this stuff too much because I feel like a lot of people have already heard it. But if for somehow you were in sessions all week up to this point and you haven't heard anything about osquery, I'll just touch on it really quick. It's fast. It runs on a lot of different types of machines, and it's open source. It basically will take a machine and turn it into a SQL searchable database, and I'm really, really simplifying it down. There's lots of ways to install it. You can apt it, you can yum it, you can package it, however you want to do it. You can brew it, although I think that's having some trouble at the moment. So 2 big differences about things we're going to talk about. As Alistair pointed out to me, they're not really that different after all, but we'll say that they're different for the sake of illustration. osquery I, which will be the interactive shell, which we'll look at just briefly today, and then osquery D, which we'll talk about a little bit later, which is the daemon side of osquery that can be configured. So I went ahead, instead of doing a live kind of tutorial, I went ahead and pre-recorded it. I probably should have taken the time to speed it up a little bit because I'm a pretty slow typer. But so we're going to go ahead and invoke the osquery I, and we can see there after we invoke it a lot of the different kind of things we can do with it. So if you use any kind of SQL, like this isn't going to be that different to you. For me, being a sysadmin, CPE type, like I don't do much with databases, so there is a little bit more of a learning curve for me. But any kind of SQL help can help you in this. So what we're going to do next is my favorite, best, always the first intro to osquery, I feel like, is we're going to select star from the etc hosts, and it's going to print out the values in our etc host file. Again, if you guys want me to elaborate on this more, I can. I feel like I'm just going to kind of hop through it because a lot of you have probably already heard this. So just to show that that's an instant response back from osquery, and then we can actually, we'll change that. So let's go ahead and we'll go in, and this shows you what kind of admin I am. Using nano, I'm going to nano the etc host file, and then I'm going to go ahead and add in a another entry into that database. So again, all this in real time and pre-recorded. I'm going to get to a point where I'm going to do some more demos. I just want to take this moment while I'm filling this out to note that osquery Fleet, which we'll talk about after this, does have an RC, a release candidate for their version 2, and I believe they're on RC 3. Most of the stuff that I'll show here I did through their demo environment that they had released for version 1. I forget whatever. And that has been deprecated, but you can still spin up environments through Docker and stuff that will do about the same thing. So I changed that file, and then I'm going to read it again. And what do you know? There's the new entry. So the ability to query right from the command line is really powerful. And I really encourage you to go back and watch Zach's session because he gets into it so deep, and he talks about joining and a lot of powerful things that I am just going to skip over for this. So the schema, so I think it's osquery.io, and then the schema will show you all of the different things that you can then explore on your machine. So there's 194 tables total in the 2.11 version, which was current, I think, at the time that I recorded this. And on the left is the tables that are available, and then on the right it shows you the specific things about that table. It also shows you the different operating systems and things that you can use it on. So we're going to go to osquery info because this is available across all of the different platforms, and it gives you a lot of the information about your installed version of osquery. So this actually returns information about osquery on the host, whether it's a Mac, Linux, BSD, or Windows. Another thing that we're going to talk about a little bit later is query packs. Query packs are just a collection, a predefined collection of queries. Nothing more scary than that. Excuse me. You can see here, no you can't, here. You can see here that these different this pack includes OS X known malicious So WireLurker is the first example, and it looks for, this is the query, what it does, and what it's trying to identify, and then they include a description of why that would be included, and this, in this instance, is an artifact that's used by that malware. osquery has tons of great documentation. GitHub is super active, and then they have their own Slack team, if I get that terminology right. So as there is a MacAdmins Slack team, there is an osquery Slack team. So when I post these and these get out, that'll link you right to it, but I think you can Google for a link to get invited into that. Cool. So let's take a step back and look. So we kind of know what osquery can do. You've heard a lot about it. You've heard a lot about its options of querying on a local machine, whether it's a Mac or Windows or Linux. So now, I love that. I love sitting through the sessions like Zach. I think it was even last year. I'm just like, this is super cool. But how do I get from this is cool to actually like using it? So I've been following the Fleet project, which Collide has released as open source. Collide, Fleet by Collide is the open source project. Collide by Collide, the Collide software as a service. I don't know how you guys. It's Collide makes Collide. Collide is Collide. Collide. That is a software as a service option, which is not what I'm talking about here today, but there was already a session on, I believe, a little bit. They touched on it. And yeah, so that was earlier today. So I think that will be posted later. So you can go back and watch that if you're interested about it. So yeah, so a little bit about Fleet, and this is kind of like, I saw this and I was like, oh, this is really rad. It gives you the option to schedule and write queries on the fly to machines that have been configured to report back to it. So we're going to do a little demo. So a little context, big fan of context about this demo. This is how I planned to do this demo originally live, which you could see this might get hairy a little bit depending on how it was going. I was going to run Collide through the Docker QuickStart on my local machine and have 3 VMs, 1804, 10.12.6, and 10.13. I think it was 4 at the time. So that's how I did all of these pre-recordings. And to be completely transparent, again, this demo was done through V1, but it's pretty much going to be about the same. So I went ahead and cloned the QuickStart, and this, again, has been deprecated since. But I still think a lot of it works if you wanted to try it. But you can also go out and clone the actual Docker, which would work pretty similar to this. But for the sake of it, I just want you to note, like when you're doing it, you are going to have to generate an SSL certificate and everything. So when you get it stood up, you will see, hey, this isn't signed. So again, this is kind of a demo environment, so you'll need to go ahead and go past that. And then once you get into it, you'll have your instance stood up. And from here, you can go ahead and configure it with a username, password, and email. I don't really think this is super necessary for us to watch me fill out the form. So I'm going to go ahead, and then once you get in, you'll get into this interface where your host will be available. You'll be able to manage queries and then packs. So packs of queries, decorators we won't talk about today, and then general config for the server, and then admin, which is if you want to add users and things for that. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to the QuickStart here. And cool. I'm going to go ahead and create a Mac installer. So just as you would do it like this, I'm doing this demo S8, this shell script to create a package installer. You can do the same thing in the actual Fleet when you clone it down. They have instructions on how you just run the make package, and it'll build a package based off that current release. So what I did is I just made a package through the demo rather than that. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to SSH into my other 2 Mac VMs. Again, I think 10.12.6, 10.13.4, because I don't know, terminal sharing, and 2 is better than 1. I don't know. So I'm going to go ahead and do it. I'm going to go ahead and install the installer to the root directory. And then one item of note is Fleet installer by itself won't do anything if you don't already have osquery installed. So osquery is a prerequisite for the Fleet installer. You guys just interrupt me if anything I'm saying is wrong, and feel free to correct me. So yeah, so cool. Install was successful. So I hop back over to the web interface. oh man, nothing's there. So one thing to keep in mind is that your machines need to know where to look. So in this demo environment, it just set the host name to your Fleet server as Collide. So when you go through the full setup process, you'll have the ability to configure where your clients are going to look to that server. Because all the communication's done over SSL, you'll have to worry about the certs being there and everything being sorted. So for this demo, what I did is I went in and I just added in a temporary host entry for this example. Before we go forward, I just want to take a minute and dig into what exactly was created. So when we did that creation, we can take a look inside the package and see what's going on. So there was a directory created, etc osquery, and then inside of that was a collide secret, a collide cert, and a collide flags, as well as a launch daemon, and as well as it runs some scripts after post install, which reloads the launch daemon. So I just want to talk about those three things in the osquery folder. This is non-specific to Collide. For the most part. So the Collide secret is what's generated from the Fleet server and allows your client to be enrolled on the server. The cert is what does the encryption of the communication, and Collide flags is actually just an osquery flags file, which documentation can be found on the osquery docs about what that contains and what that can do. So basically what's awesome about the Fleet installer is it goes ahead and says, if your server is here, we're going to go ahead and generate all of that information for you out of the gate, bundle it all up, and make it so you can install it right on your Mac, which is very helpful if you use something like Monkey or Jamf to deploy the package out. So then once I get those actually running with the new host names, they'll start to report in. Because I don't discriminate, I'm going to do it as well on a Linux server. Who here uses Linux in their environment or maintains Linux servers or something as support? Oh, yeah. All right, sweet. So this is totally applicable. So I'm going to move basically the three things that were inside the etc osquery folder. I'm going to move those same things out of the same package over to the Linux server. And there might be a cleaner way to do this now about how to make a systemd type thing for Collide and osquery on that. But again, for sake of a demo environment, something like this could get you up and running just to start interacting with the servers. So there's an example of a Collide secret, which is also available within the web interface. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the contents, those three items, the cert, the flags file, and the secret into the etc osquery folder. So what did I do wrong? Yeah, everything in the contents set over to the folder. So once that stuff's there, we'll be able to start up the daemon on a Linux machine. Now, don't forget to add your hosts. So I'm going to go back in and add the hosts as I did before on the Macs. When I first initially did this talk, it was more of like how you can get this up and running and demo it in your own environment, but you can kind of see what's going on here. So once that's going, we can go ahead and start the daemon. There's a big long string, and basically you would call osquery with the flags file, and then it knows how to run. So then it's going to reach out to the server and try to enroll that. So using the TLS cert is the cert for TLS encryption, and then the key, it enrolls it itself and communicates based on the flags that you've previously set. So once you have the clients enrolled, you can start creating queries. So I'm going to go ahead and make an etc hosts query here because why not? I feel like that's always the first one people do. So I don't want to break from tradition. So you can see some nice features, auto-population and stuff. The GUI has gotten a little bit cleaner, I think, in 2.0. I don't know why I saw weird stuff with the, but yeah, it's been super solid. So I'm just going to say run it on all my hosts because all the hosts, whether it's Mac or Linux, should have an etc host file. And sweet, there you go. So you can see that there's the Mac OS and then test Mac OS and then Ubuntu. So the three different VMs reporting in all of this stuff. So sweet, a ton of information queried just like that. So I'm going to go ahead and save that, and we'll save that query so we can use it again later. so we don't have to go through and fill all that out. And then I'm going to go ahead and, yep, there it is, saved by me. And then I'm going to create a new query, and then I'm just going to use the osquery info because it's pre-filled and I don't want to have to type anything out. So we'll save that. And we'll select we want it to run on all the hosts. So we'll save it, and then we want it to run on everything. Cool, I didn't actually set that. So no packs. So what we're going to do now is we're going to create a pack. So I think example hosts. That's not good. We want this to be an example pack. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, let's do it on all the hosts. And probably a better descriptor would be all the hosts. But there you go. So now we have a pack. So from a pack, you can start to figure out how you want to run different queries on it. So you can see how I started out with, in the beginning, you can run a query on a host and it returns a certain amount of information. So this is where packs will start allowing you to build out different types of queries that may or may not all relate to one another. Maybe you want to know all about a certain aspect of a machine. It's all really however you want to build it out. So what you can do is you can choose a query that you've already made. So for example, etc hosts. You can choose how often you want it to run, and then what platforms you want it to run on, individually or all of them. And then you can choose a minimum version for osquery if a schema requires a specific version. You can say only run on this version, and then you can select the type of logging. So if you already went to the osquery, you learned about the type of logging where there's differential. So anytime there's a change, and then there's a differential, but only tell me when stuff's added. And then there's a snapshot, which means every time that runs every 120 seconds, it's going to return whatever that field contains. So depending on what kind of information you want and how your infrastructure can handle it, you can set that how you want it. So I just did 2 examples of differential logging there, adding and subtracting, and went from there. So that's active and that's running. So you can see there's 2 queries in that pack. It's enabled and it's running on 3 hosts. When we set up the server, when you stand up the Fleet server, you will be able to set where you want the log files to go. So these log files, these osquery output log files, will actually contain the JSON that you need, contains the logs that you need to see the information. So isn't that nice? It tells us right there. See? 8.8.8 host names, whatever. The action was added. Super useful. So we'll get more about how to clean that up, and that's the last part of it. But I want to take a quick second and mention, I think it's RC3 still for Fleet. So there's 2.0 coming out. It's in the release candidate 3. So you can go out and download it, start playing with it. And this just makes everything so much easier. So yes, command line interface, please. It makes it managing a Fleet server from the command line so much easier, and it allows you to deal with packs and queries and labels and configurations all from the command line, and it also gives you the ability to store all of those things in a folder that can be version controlled, which is awesome. So I'm actually back on my Mac now, and I'm gonna get the binary from the project, and I'm gonna unzip it, very painfully unzip it, and then I really only care about the Darwin. I don't really care about the Linux at this because I'm running this on my local Mac client, and this will be illustrated later. And you'll see when I unzip it, you'll see 2 things. You'll see Fleet and Fleet control. So Fleet control is the command line binary that will actually allow you to interact with the server. The Fleet binary itself is actually what does the web server. So that's not the one we really want. We don't really want Fleet, we want Fleet control. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take that and I'm going to move it into my Fleet over into my user local bin so I can execute it from my local Mac. Sweet. So once it's there, we'll just make sure that it works. All right, cool. So we're in business. So from here, you can start to configure how to set up to connect to your remote server. So you'll actually be able to use a fleet control setup and tell it like, hey, this is my server URL, this is how I want to connect. You can pre-save your email and things like that. And you can see a lot of that setup, drill into the pages. They have really well documented through the command line, so you can see how you can set that up in the configuration values. Yeah. So let's see here. So I'm going to log in. I don't know why I went back. Yeah. So we're going to go do a login. And then, so I've already saved the URL which I'm connecting to, so I'll just use this email.example. And it's as simple as this. So the email that you signed up with or created the account with on the server, you would just use that here with the password to get in. And once that's connected, so what I did here is I went ahead and created another folder, changed over to it called Fleet Demo, and I'll show you why I did that. So using the fleet control, I'll be able to actually reach out to the server and get the options of the server as it's configured. So then it spits out this file. So this is from the server onto my client. I was able to pull down that information. So a little bit probably better would be, let's go ahead and just put that into a file so we can read it. So now I'll be able to, everybody's favorite text editor, that file. And there we go. So a little bit more manageable. Now it's in a file, and I can actually go through and read the options with that. So again, this is for the version 2, which is really nice because now from the command line, you can go out and grab these options. What is also nice is that if you wanted to modify those options or change those options, you can do that right from the command line as well. So if you wanted to edit that file locally and then apply it back to your server, so I'm going to apply that file. And I'm not going to change it at all for sake of illustration, but there it is. It'll say, applied your options. Sweet. So now I have much more flexibility from the command line. So here I've cloned the Facebook osquery repository. Just cloned it down, CD'd over to the packs side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to convert the current version at this time, the OSX attacks conf, which is out there. We talked about that a little bit earlier. And then I'm going to move that over to that temp demo directory that I was talking about. And I'm just going to dump it in a text file. And then it's there. So let's hop back over there. And then I'm going to go ahead and do just that. I'm going to take that fleet control, and I'm going to apply that file that we just copied. I'm not going to modify it at all. I'm assuming that the people at Facebook know way better about what's going on in OSX attacks than I do, and upload it. So you see, just like that, it applied 73 queries in one pack. So you saw me how much I struggled to get just 2 queries in by hand, and then put those in a pack. Well, this just did 73 queries in one pack, just like that. So if I was to go back to the web interface, they would show up there. That's incredible. That's an awesome version 2 edition that just makes this so much easier. So here I am in this folder. For this example, I have those 2 files, that options and the OSX attacks. So I'm just going to init this folder, and now it's tracked in Git. And just like that, I can set it up with my local Git repository. Awesome. Now I can track all the changes that I make to any of the packs or files just like that. And it goes well beyond what I'm talking about here as far as being able to edit, modify queries, lots of manage packs, and then also the server options and user controls. You can add users and things right from the command line. But for sake of illustration here, it's a little bit beyond scope. So I'm just going to add that and commit it. And now that pack is tracked within my version control system, which is great, which makes me happy, which makes my boss happy, and my coworkers happy. So Fleet has great folks you can reach out to. They are both in the MacAdmins Slack and in the osquery Slack team. So I believe I linked to the osquery Slack team here, and then you can also see lots of docs and things on their GitHub. So again, taking a step back, we have osquery installed on a client. We're sending it configs from the Fleet server. The client's reporting back to Fleet. And all of the client's information that's coming back is going to a log file that we predetermined that's sitting on the Fleet server. So now we have this log file Now we have to determine what we're going to do with it. You could use, I use Graylog here as an example, but you could use whatever. You could use an elk stack, which is basically Graylog, or you could use Splunk if you're made of money, or you could use, whatever you want. Again, I chose Graylog because they have a community edition available. It has a low barrier of entry, and it makes pretty graphs easy. So they do have an E option. I don't use it, but it's there. And you can get started easy. Like I said, low barrier of entry. Like you can just download the OVA and run it, or you can run it in Docker or whatever, or just install it on Deb or, however. Again, super flexible. So I'm going to reiterate why we need this. So we have these 2 logs. Really, all we care about is the result log. So in my example, I told it to spit them out in var log osquery status, which is the current status of how osquery is functioning, and then the result log, which is the results of any and all queries that we use. I chose to use FileBeat, which is part of Elastic's repertoire of tools that you can use. And basically, rather than using Syslog to forward it to Graylog, which is totally doable, I chose to use FileBeat because of how it can handle the log files and how it enables Graylog to ingest the JSON really easily. And I also manage log files with FileBeat in our infrastructure, so it was really easy just to add a couple lines and ship it off. So taking a look at that example log file again, same one we saw earlier, just Keynote formatted differently. We can see that the name of the pack is example check. The etc, and this is the etc hosts part of that, the query inside of that pack that was returned. The host identifier was macOS. Not super helpful in this instance, but there is the host UUID, which can be used to identify hosts aside from host name. And then addresses 8.88, whatever was added. So what we can do is on Graylog. This isn't a Graylog talk. Again, I didn't want to get too specific about log ingestion. I feel like that could be its own talk. And you might have something set up already. Again, you could use Elk or Splunk or whatever. But Graylog has an extractor, built-in JSON extractor for some time now. And basically, you would go into the set up the input, say, hey, anything that comes from here, use the JSON extractor. So it takes a log like this to something like this. So it actually takes it and breaks it out. I've ellipsised out the message because the message is essentially the entire log file as we saw it previously. But here you can see the file, and a lot of this is extra information that we get from using the FileBeat agent on the client. That's really nice. It shows you the file it actually came from, and then the information from the osquery logs. So calendar time, the timestamp of it actually, and then if there was any offset, decorations, host name, stuff like that, UUID. So inside Graylog, inside probably any syslog, any of these different items give you the ability to set rules, sort, create dashboards. So if you had, for example, the OSX attacks pack, and you deploy that out to your fleet, what would you need to know? You would just need to know if there was ever a log returned from that pack. So you could go into your syslog and say, hey, just let me know if that pack ever returns anything. And then you can go from there and see how serious it is or what you need to do with that host. Again, I feel like there could be a whole talk on integrating and setting this up in a syslog. But it does. It gives you the ability to log it all, log the changes, however you determine essential for your organization. Maybe you only care about differential logs. Maybe you care about event streams and you need to know anytime somebody plugs something in or unplugs it. You can do that too. So it's kind of your own adventure. Graylog has a great community. They have great documentation, and you can find a lot of their stuff on GitHub. One thing I didn't really touch on here today, but I feel like is worth really, really noting, is the power of ad hoc. So I approached this for me because of my audit restrictions in a way that was like, I need a pre-set list of checks that I need to do, and I need to know that if any of my clients fall outside the scope of those checks. However, the power of ad hoc cannot be understated for what Fleet and osquery can do. So you saw me as from my local machine use fleet control to connect into the fleet server. Well, that also has the option to send a osquery command through fleet out to whatever host that I want to send it to, all through the command line. So you can actually send the command through fleet control to the fleet server, and then it will send that query out to any of the predefined clients that you have in that command. Those clients, it'll run, report back to the fleet server, and then back to your client, which gives you a really, really great, almost instantaneous tool for getting information about your fleet or a shard of your fleet, depending on how big you are. You can also do the same thing through the web interface, which is effectively what you saw me do earlier when I just ran it against all of the 3 machines that were enrolled, and then it returned it in the GUI. So again, taking a step back, I feel like this could look a lot different for a lot of different people. I'm not saying this is the best way. Some people, are really big into Docker. I think there's already a Terraform script out there for Fleet to run in AWS. Like it's kind of whatever you want to do. I think osquery is super powerful. The fact that it can run on pretty much anything is awesome. The scope of the schemas is just too much information. Like you really just need to go into this with the mindset of what do I need to know, or else you're going to overwhelm yourself really quick. And then go from there. Build that off of what it's required of you. And then, again, infrastructure, you can run it on whatever. You could run it on a Linux VM. You could run it in the cloud. You could run it on Docker, which can run on all of those things. And you can send it up to your Syslog server, whatever that is. Moneybag, Splunk, Elk, or Graylog. So what's next? I don't know. Choose your own adventure. I think you could do supercomputer. I think you could, maybe you're like, man, this is a lot and I don't want to deal with it. There's paid products out there. You could go look that route. Be like, man, I see the need for this tool and it's really awesome, but I don't want to build it out and I don't want to maintain it. So you could go that route. Or maybe you find yourself in the middle. You be the mainframe hacker. You want to get it set up, get it running, maintain it for a while, see how it goes. Go from there, feel it out. I don't know. Or maybe you're just like, yeah, let's compile it from scratch the whole way and spend my life in the cave of time. But I don't know. Again, it's kind of up to you. My main goal for this talk was to try to give you some context of osquery and how it can be used in an infrastructure. I'm not saying my infrastructure is the right way to use it. I'm not saying it's the best or the cleanest, but I think, again, context is key, so seeing it within that is kind of essential. So I don't know if you guys know it, but Clyde has stickers down there, so you should stop by them and talk to them about that. Again, I'm at Lucanator on Twitter, and then Lucas J. Hall on Slack and on the blog. We're going to take a little bit here. We're lucky to have a couple of the Clyde guys in the room, so I hope I didn't butcher that too bad. But we'll go ahead and open it up for questions.
Oh, that's really far. This is going to have to be a team effort. Are you ready? I think we can do it.
From a communication perspective, what do I have to open on the local firewall and on the network firewall to make this all talk to each other?
All the client server communications over TLS.
Okay. So just straight HTTPS.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So aside from whatever you use to deploy your packages or however you get it on the machine initially, and again, that's nothing specific to Fleet, if I'm correct. That's an osquery spec of how it reports back and forth. So.
So the client, is that push or pull though? Like is the Fleet server literally pushing down to the clients, therefore you have to open an incoming port on the clients, or are they pulling back to the server?
So once you make a config change, it gets pushed down and written to the machine. So like once you have your instruction file there, it runs and reports it back up. Yep, go for it. Everybody, this is Zach.
Hey, I'm Zach. Mike and I and Victor, who some of you know, built most of Fleet. So the communication between the osquery client and Fleet is always initiated by the osquery client. So the only connectivity that the client needs is the ability to connect to your server. So if your server is behind a VPN, then the client needs to be on the VPN. If your server is exposed to the public internet, you just need public internet access. So it's never listening on any port on the local machine. The server is listening. The client reaches out and says, what updates do you have for me? Which means, is there a new configuration with scheduled queries that I should run? Are there new live queries that I should run? And here are my new logs.
Cool. Anybody else?
So all of those real-time queries that you would do through the Collide UI or the Fleet UI, those don't trigger anything on the client. The client checks in and says, am I supposed to be doing anything here? So
Yeah.
how frequently do clients check in then?
It's determined based on your config, I think, is what you can do. So you can say like 10 seconds, a minute, whatever. And it's just all per your install of osquery on the client.
So a live query then could, for some definitions of live, depending on what your check-in is?
Well, yes, but like say you tell yes, it's the polling interval that you set on the client. Now you could say like this only check my Etsy host file every hour. But if you say, hey, what's your Etsy host file say? It's not going to wait an hour and then reply. It's going to run that query for you right when it knows to run that query. Does that make sense? So, yeah.
And a typical interval you'd set if you're on the order of like 100 hosts, you probably have them check every 10 seconds. So you'll have a reply from all your online hosts within 10 seconds of starting a live query. And if you're on the order of thousands of hosts, then you're probably doing something more like 60 seconds. So you'll have the results from all of those online hosts within a minute of starting the query. So it is fairly real time.
And note that as the number of hosts that you have in something like Fleet goes higher, the like hosts are basically checking in like somewhat perpetually. So you'll run a query and like somewhat instantly start getting results, and then it'll kind of be a long tail of results filtering in. And as long as hosts could be online, they'll come online, they'll report in their results and stuff. So as long as you'd like to wait for results, you can get results, and it'll be like somewhat inverse parabolic.
Did you want to talk about the sharding too?
Oh yeah,
In that?
sure. You
Yeah,
wanna explain
for
query
large
sharding?
scale. Yeah.
Yeah, so sharding, query sharding is one of these things that we stole from Facebook infrastructure when we were working on osquery. So when you roll out a new query, you're like, let's say you have a schedule, it's got one query in it, select star from osquery info. Now you're like, all right, this processes table, that's really cool, I want to schedule that query as well, but you have 100,000 hosts. And when you schedule a query in osquery, it is effectively executing code that has never been executing on that server before. So anything could happen really. So there is this concept of a shard where you can it's a 0 through 100 value that you can set on a query. In addition to the query text itself, the interval, a number of other options, you can set a shard. And shard 1 is basically like, okay, give this query to 1% of my hosts. And then you can observe your metrics. That went well, okay, bump the shard to 5, to 10, to 20, to 50, and finally when shard is 100, it's now running on all your hosts. So it's just a utility you can use to slow roll out a query if that is something that's important to you.
Cool. Sweet.
So is there any ability in the Fleet server to, say, email me if any of my host's file gets changed because I know it should never be changed? And if so, do you have to do anything like configure sendmail?
that's when a syslog would come into play. So Fleet's writing a log file of all of the things that happen according to whatever spec you set. So that's when you need another tool to come in and say, hey, send this log file up to the syslog server. The syslog server is going to ingest it and then parse it to whatever you deem important to you. So this is kind of where in your choose your own adventure thing, it's pretty heavy because you're doing all of the configuration as far as I need to know when this pack gets triggered, or I don't need to know when this pack gets triggered, but I want to know certain information from it and the value of a dashboard or something like that. And that's kind of all on you with this kind of thing. Like, again, there are other options that you can pay that'll do all of that for you and do it really well, but this is kind of the build it yourself adventure. Yeah. I was talking to somebody else, and who in here uses something like Monkey or Sal or something too? So one of the things I heard is, well, why would I need this information if I have like Monkey Report or something like that? And I think my biggest thing was the ability to do pretty much instantaneous queries against your fleet is really valuable, and then also the scope of what it can do and how it does it. The performant idea behind how osquery was built versus if you look at how Monkey, for example, Monkey Report generates its information about a client and all of the scripts that it's doing and things. Like, have you ever sat and watched your post-flight scripts and how long that takes and stuff? So, you know, I think context of how well it's utilizing the system and things like that. And then the ability to pump it into a Syslog or something for alerting is really nice as well. So it was just a sidebar on that as well too. So yeah, anybody else have any questions? And
If you're using the TLS plugin for logging and your machine is off the network that it can reach back to the server, how long do those logs stay on the endpoints before they might get flushed out?
for the clients until they report back.
Yeah, because you've got your endpoint. Your endpoints are doing the logging on the server. So if like I turn off my Wi-Fi.
So you're saying that they can't reach the fleet server, for
Correct.
example. So I think I'll let Zach answer this one, but I think it just kind of depends on how you have it set up. But I think they keep it until they can report back and then give the last whatever. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, that's correct. There's a local buffer. The logs get buffered locally, and they aren't purged until they are successfully written to the server. Or there's a configurable maximum limit of, at some point it starts dropping logs so you don't eat up your whole disk. But it's very typical. I mean, this is designed to be run on laptops and all sorts of places where the connectivity is not constant. And that's why you have scheduled queries. So even when it's not connected, the query schedules still run as long as osquery is running. And those logs are buffered locally. And then they're sent up to the fleet server, to wherever else they're being logged when the connectivity is back.
And I think to keep in mind the two types of like the scheduled queries, and then also I didn't really talk about the event streams, but if you went to Zach's session, you talked a little bit more about event streams, which are essentially like USB actions, for example. It's just any of the actions that happens on the USB over this period of time, just send that up to the log every so often. So it has a longer log and might be more verbose depending on how you're importing it. So you might incur loss if you don't have those buffers set accordingly for those checks. Yeah, Mike.
And so there was an osquery conference a few months ago called QueryCon, and a guy named Chris Long, who works at Palantir, gave a really good talk where he went into the eventing subsystem of osquery and really did a lot of explanation of all of the different kind of buffers and expiration options that you can set that control how many logs you keep, what the resolution of them is, how to expire them, which direction they expire from, and all that. So you can go really deep in that rabbit hole if you want, for sure.
Sweet. Cool.
Is there overlap with launcher and the fleet downloader? Like, I don't really know what the difference between those would be.
Yeah. Do you guys want to talk to the launcher? I did launcher. Your tool. Yeah. You're talking about the Collide launcher tool that does the enrollment. Yeah. Just how that plays into fleet. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, because when I did it, I basically manually generated everything. Systemd actions on the Linux servers. I let the Windows guy touch the Windows boxes. And then I also did the Mac packages. So I can't answer that.
Yeah, so launcher is kind of an osquery execution environment, and packaging. Well, there's a few bits of it. There's a few facts. Like osquery is a very fast-moving project. New tables get introduced really often, and if you like the new hotness, like you want to update osquery as often as possible. But that's kind of tricky sometimes for some people in some environments. You may not have really good update tooling or hygiene, so that's kind of complicated. So that's one problem. Another problem is that it's kind of difficult to package osquery sometimes because you need the flag file, you need the certs, you need the secret, you need a launch daemon, you may need a system to unifile on another operating system. So packaging osquery is kind of tricky. It's pretty much it. It's pretty much the main value adds. But basically, we made this QuickStart before we made the launcher, and the launcher is really born out of the fact that like osquery is like this multi-process model where it starts like this watcher process that then spawns the process that does all the work, and then it'll watch that and kind of observe it, make sure it's behaving properly. And this like multi-process model can fail in a myriad of interesting ways. So we have like a osquery execution environment that will like watch all of this, make sure that if one part goes down, it gets brought up properly. So that's one big value out of the launcher. The other is like for a lot of our customers and a lot of just folks that use osquery, like I said, auto updating is a problem, or just updating osquery is a problem. So we have an auto updater in the launcher. So if that's something that's interesting to you, but honestly, I would say if you're not interested in the tables that we have in the launcher that aren't in core, that like don't follow all of the osquery core guidelines, and you have really good update hygiene, and you're not afraid of building a package, then consider just using raw osquery. But if any of those things is interesting, then use the packaging tooling, use the auto updater, use whatever you want. But it's really just a set of tools and helpers that's similar to this, and you can kind of opt into whatever you want.
If we're already installing osquery via Monkey and Auto Packager and things like that and getting those updates done, are you saying it would be better if we uninstalled all of those and then reinstalled it via the Collide launcher, since that's going to keep it up to date, or will those conflict with each other, or how would that work?
I mean, I think if you're using auto package and that's working well for you, then stick with it for sure. Keep going with it. If you've already sunk the cost into configuring, so I'd say 80% of people that use osquery connect it to a TLS server. Some people use configuration and log to the file system. Some people use Kafka. Like there's a long tail of options that you can use. But for like 85% of people, everyone configures it the same way. And if you do this, then to use the launcher, it's two options. You specify the host name, you specify the secret. But if you want to do this with raw osquery, it's like 26 options or something that you have to specify. So it's just a little bit of a headache if you're doing it in this kind of consistent way. But if you've already kind of sunk the cost into configuring osquery, you already have a good auto updating flow with auto package or something, then there's, it's not like there's any secret sauce in the launcher that you can't get. It's just, if you haven't done this yet and you're looking to and you want all of that and you don't have a really robust way to distribute packages, or you just don't want to worry about it, then consider using the launcher. But if you have it all set up and you want to use raw osquery, feel free. You're not missing out on anything.
Yeah, so I was already deploying osquery via Monkey. So I just added in the Collide enroll package and just marked it that it requires the osquery package for it to be installed prior to installing the Collide enroll script, and that's all you need to do if you're already deploying it that way. So then I like to have the kind of the granular control about the update versions, when I'm pushing out and stuff. So in my infrastructure, it's nice because I can say, okay, well now we're gonna go to this version. Okay, now we're gonna go to this version. So it's all, again, context. You like bleeding edge? Be bleeding edge if you like to, That's where I come from too. Sweet. Cool. Yeah, so these guys will be around. They also have a table. I'll be around. So I think we're done early. Enjoy the evening. Thanks so much for your time. Right on.